When looking for your new car, have you ever thought, I want something that sits up high in traffic and is as secure as an SUV, but something that's as small and as easy to drive as a hatchback, but still with some of that European flair? Well, it turns out that more than a few people have asked for just that. I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this little guy behind me is Peugeot's new 2008, a high-riding version of the 208 hatchback. Peugeot have managed to sell 100,000 of these cars overseas, and they're now going to try their luck with the 2008 in the tough Australian market. There's a small sea of micro SUV competitors now, from the Holden Trax and the Ford EcoSport to the upmarket Audi Q3 and Mercedes-Benz GLA class. Well, the French aren't surrendering, and in fact, their competitors should be worried. The DNA inside the 2008 is all carried over from the 208 hatchback. Not that that's anything to complain about. In here, everything feels very French. The cabin is light and spacious thanks to the standard glasshouse roof, which is just the first indicator of how generous the kit levels are on the Peugeot 2008. Finally, Peugeot has done away with the millions of little buttons which used to be like a nightmarish trademark of their interiors. And instead, all 2008s get this responsive and sharp 7-inch touchscreen, which is really easy to use. This mid-spec Allure model gets standard satellite navigation, but all models get Bluetooth music streaming and USB input. There are plenty of cubby holes inside the 2008, including a central compartment, fairly wide door bins, this cooled glove box, and down here in front of the gear stick. Strangely though, there are no grab handles on the ceiling of this car. The 2008 represents pretty good value within its segment. The base model Active with the manual transmission can be had for less than $25,000 on road. This mid-spec Allure, which we think is the one to go for, can generally be had for less than $30,000, whereas the top spec Outdoor, which really just adds a better turbo diesel engine, can only be had for about $35,000 on road. Whereas the seats in the front of the Peugeot 2008 are nice and big and supportive, the bench here in the back is a little bit hard. And for someone like me, yes, at 6'0", my knee room is really restricted when the seat in front of me is put back into my driving position. My headroom is just okay. For rear seat passengers, the floor isn't flat, which means the middle person will have a bit of a fight on their hands as to where to put their feet, and there's also no dedicated cup holders that can come down in the center of the two seats. It's easy to fold the seats down in the Peugeot 2008 to create a large cargo space. When the seats are down, it gives you 1,400 litres worth of big boot space if you're a fan of flat pack furniture. And that brings me on to performance. And everything so far has gone pretty well for the 2008. It's not a bad looking car, it has a classy interior, and the value proposition is pretty excellent. Unfortunately, that pattern doesn't continue under the bonnet. And the main problem here is just that the 2008 is gratuitously underpowered. We have arrived in an era where turbocharging of petrol engines is both normal and expected because it means that small engines in small cars like this one are able to get a respectable get up and go. Unfortunately, that technology just does not exist under the bonnet of this Peugeot 2008, at least in the mid-spec 1.6 litre petrol form. This engine has just 88 kilowatts of power and 160 newton meters of torque, but that torque doesn't come in until a really high 4,250 RPM. So to say that you have to work the 2008 hard is an understatement. On the freeway, doing 110 kilometers per hour, which is normal in Australia, you'll find that the engine ticks over at more than 3,000 RPM, which is buzzing. The 5-speed manual transmission is also a bit off the pace for 2014, because the lack of a crucial 6th gear means that, once again on the freeway, your driving is just not as efficient as it could be. However, this manual transmission is still a better alternative than the 4-speed automatic, which is the other option, and we think that you should avoid that. The manual's not too bad, with a fairly short throw, but on this press car, the clutch is very squeaky. Quality. The 2008 is fairly comfortable around town, and it does an admirable job absorbing bumps at low speeds. But when you start building speed or using a road that has a few imperfections, you find that the suspension starts to get a little bit less refined. And in fact, at higher speeds, you don't so much drive the 2008 as ride a small horse, which is reasonably fun, but not exactly refined. The issue is you're always hunting for gears in order to keep the car on the pace, the suspension's bouncing around in the ruts in the Australian road system, and you just find that the prestige quality of the ride, which is so good at low speeds, starts to fade very quickly. When it comes to safety, on the passive front, the 2008 takes care of its occupants with 8 airbags around the cabin. It's a bit of a shame though that a driver's knee airbag is not offered on this car. On the active front, there's the usual complement of systems, including brake assist, traction control, and stability control. Pleasingly, all 2008s come with a reversing camera, which is mounted in the rear vision mirror, which we think works well and earns our safety tick. When it comes to running the 2008, servicing isn't a bad deal. Peugeot is pretty generous in offering a 5-year cap price servicing program, and the servicing intervals for this car are annually or every 15,000 kilometres. But no matter how it goes, your yearly servicing costs are capped at $369. The official fuel figures for the 2008 are a bit misleading because the engines do need to be worked pretty hard to get anywhere. So the figure of 6.5 litres per 100 kilometres for this mid-spec 1.6 litre Allure is definitely off the beat. We think a much more realistic figure is 8.5 litres per 100 kilometres combined cycle. And that reminds me that the 2008 is two-wheel drive only, so any ideas that you might have had of extended adventuring off-road are probably unlikely to get off the ground in this car. So taking into account its engine, which struggles, is the Peugeot 2008 a better option than the Holden Trax or the Ford EcoSport? Well yes, we say that it is. The 2008 is a tiny European package that does most things well enough. For most people, the Peugeot 2008 would be a decent runabout for around town, with a classy interior, decent storage space, and the not insignificant attraction of the Peugeot badge. We quite like it.